The wind howled outside the gray stone walls of Winterfell as Eddard Stark rode through the gates with a babe wrapped in wool and secrets. The banners of House Stark merely stirred, heavy with snow and silence. He dismounted without a word, the child asleep in his arms, unaware that his very breath was a danger to everyone around him. Catelyn stood on the steps, arms folded tightly around herself, eyes scanning the scene, not for her husband, but for the child she already feared. When she saw the bundle in his arms, her stomach clenched. Not a ward, not a foundling, but a child, a baby. And her husband's face told her everything she needed to know. Later, in the bedchamber, their voices were low but sharp. "You promised me," Catelyn whispered, her voice shaking. "I promised my sister. I promised my honor." "What of my honor?" She hissed. "What of our children?" Ned had no answer. He only said the child's name was Jon. Just Jon. He would be raised at Winterfell as a Stark, but not truly. Not in name. Not in blood. And certainly not in love. That night, Catelyn lay awake. The baby's cries echoed down the stone halls like whispers of betrayal. She could feel his presence, small and fragile, in the nursery beside her own baby boy. Robb, her heart twisted with rage. Every cry from Jon's mouth stole love from her son's future. Every breath he took was a stain on her marriage. For days she watched. Jon's skin was pale, his hair dark like Ned's. His eyes opened only rarely, but when they did, she swore he looked at her with knowing, with shame. She told herself it was madness babies couldn't carry guilt, but it didn't matter. Hate bloomed anyway. Maester Luwin tried to reassure her. "He's no threat, my lady. A child is innocent." She turned away. Then the gods made a mistake. It happened on the 5th night. Ned had been called away to a border dispute. Catelyn stood alone in the nursery. Robb slept peacefully. Jon did not. His soft mewling filled the chamber like a shadow stretching. Across the floor, she walked to his cradle slowly, hands clenched at her sides. The fire crackled behind her, casting long shadows on the walls. She looked down at him, so small, so helpless. Yet to her, he was a reminder of Ned's betrayal, of a woman she would never know, but would always hate. "I could love you," she whispered. "I could try. But I know I won't. I never will," Jon whimpered. She reached down and lifted him gently, rocking him in her arms, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. He nestled into her shoulder, sighing softly. For a moment, her arms went still, but the silence didn't last. A storm broke inside her, a wave of grief, fury, and something darker. Her hands tightened, her jaw clenched. She pressed the baby, closer, too close. When it was done, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She laid Jon back in the cradle, wrapped tight like nothing had happened. Then she walked away. At dawn, Maester Luwin found the child cold and silent. He called it a sudden sickness. Some said the cold had crept too close. Some said the gods had taken him early. Catelyn sat with Robb in her arms and never spoke of it. And when Ned returned, she broke the news with dry eyes. Ned's face fell in a way that would never rise again. He knelt beside the empty cradle and wept, alone. He never asked questions. Perhaps he knew. Perhaps the silence was his way of preserving the only thing he had left his family. But Winterfell changed that day. The wind seemed colder, the walls heavier, and Ned's heart, though still loyal and strong, was no longer whole. Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, was buried without a name, without a history, and without the truth. But secrets don't stay buried in the north forever, especially not when the dead begin to walk. Years passed, but the silence around Jon Snow's death never truly faded. Ned Stark buried the pain beneath layers of duty, honor, and fatherhood. He told no one of the promise made to his dying sister. He never spoke of the baby's real name, nor of the bloodline he had sworn to protect. The truth was a ghost he carried with him, quiet, ever-present, and unbearable. Catelyn bore more children: Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon. She was a good mother, or so people said. Devoted, proud, and fierce. But there were nights when she'd wake from dreams drenched in sweat, the echo of a baby's cry in her ears, and no cradle beside her bed. She'd stare at the ceiling and wonder what kind of woman she had become. Maester Luwin never questioned her, but he watched her closely from then on. The silence surrounding Jon's death weighed heavy on him, too. The child had been healthy, strong lungs, warm skin. But when the gods take, men are not meant to argue. So he said nothing, and he kept his suspicions buried beneath years of loyalty to House Stark. In the north, rumors rarely flew fast, but servants spoke in hushed tones. Some believed the child had died of exposure. Others whispered darker things of old curses or a mother's jealousy. One maid swore she saw Lady Stark enter the nursery that night with empty hands and leave with wet sleeves. But stories were stories, and the north was full of snow and silence. Without Jon, the Stark household shifted in subtle ways. Ned spent more time with Robb, raising him to carry the weight of Winterfell. Arya, wild and untamed, often clashed with Sansa, who had already begun dreaming of southern castles and golden-haired princes. Bran loved climbing, Rickon barely spoke, and Catelyn ruled the home like winter itself, beautiful, harsh, and impossible to please. But in the far north, beyond the wall, things stirred. The Night's Watch, slowly crumbling from lack of good men, never gained Jon Snow's sword. Without him, there was no new fire in their ranks, no natural leader to rise from nothing. Samwell Tarly, sent by his cruel father, found no brother to shield him. He crumbled quickly, fading into the background, surviving only by quiet compliance. Jeor Mormont, the old bear, had no steward to protect him in the dark nights ahead. Far beyond the wall, the dead began to walk. In the south, Robert Baratheon still ruled, fat and forgetful, his war-forged body now dulled by wine and whores. When he visited Winterfell, he brought with him more than just old stories. He brought a storm. Catelyn, cold to him as always, did her best to mask her disgust at the man who had likely fathered her husband's bastard. She never asked, and Ned never told. When Robert offered to make Ned the hand of the king, the past reared its ugly head. Ned hesitated, his eyes drifting to the godswood as if the old trees could grant him wisdom. "I have a duty here," he said softly. "You have a duty to the realm," Robert snapped. "And to me? Or have you grown soft under all this snow?" Catelyn, for once, said nothing, but her eyes burned with unspoken fear. She had lost one child to secrets. She wouldn't lose her husband to them, too. Yet Ned went, as always, when duty called, southward to a court of snakes, liars, and betrayal. He left Robb to watch over Winterfell, left Bran still climbing towers, left secrets buried deep. But the world would not stay still for him, because one secret buried with Jon Snow in the frozen ground had left behind ripples. And those ripples were reaching farther than any of them could imagine. Daenerys Targaryen, across the narrow sea, received visions of a lost prince whose song had been silenced. The Red Priests spoke in whispers of a child who should have lived, of a flame that had been snuffed too early. And in the darkest corners of the world, where the White Walkers stirred and ancient magics waited to rise again, something sensed the void Jon had left, a void too dangerous to ignore. King's Landing smelled of rot and Rose's perfume and poison, all in the same breath. Ned Stark hated every brick of it. The city walls pressed in like a cage, and behind every smile was a dagger waiting for his back. He hadn't wanted to come, but Robert's command was not a request. And now the South threatened to devour him, just as the North had swallowed his secrets. Catelyn stayed behind, watching Winterfell with silent resentment. She didn't cry when he left. She hadn't cried in years. The older Robb grew, the more he reminded her of the baby she had protected and the one she hadn't. It haunted her more than she admitted. Arya was harder to tame now, and Sansa dreamed only of marrying a prince. Bran still climbed. Until he fell. When the Raven came bearing word that Bran had fallen from a tower, Catelyn broke for the first time in years. Her hand trembled as she read the parchment, her heart pounding louder than the storm outside. She left Robb in command and sat by Bran's bedside for weeks, her eyes sunken, her mind elsewhere, somewhere colder, darker. Somewhere near another crib, long buried. Had the gods cursed her? Was this her penance? And still no one knew. Not Mr. Lewin, not Ned, not even Littlefinger when he visited her in King's Landing for whispered schemes and veiled insults. They all saw Lady Stark, proud and composed. Not the woman who had once pressed a hand over a baby's face and waited for silence. Meanwhile, the capital was tightening around Ned like a noose. Robert drank too much and ruled too little. Cersei smiled with venom behind her golden hair. Shaim watched Ned with those calm, mocking eyes. And Littlefinger played his own game. Without Jon Snow, Ned had no natural ear to confide in. No younger shadow to advise him or remind him of the cost of secrecy. He bore it all alone, Lyanna's dying words, the truth of Jon's blood, the shame of covering his wife's sin. And then the first whisper came. The Queen's children are not the King's. The truth, so dangerous, so easily buried under lies. But Ned was Ned honor bound, even to his own doom. In the North, Robb stood taller now. He trained longer. He bore the weight of a household that watched him not just as heir, but as lord. Catelyn, though still present, seemed distant. Her hand often trembled when she touched Bran's face. She prayed often, not for Bran to wake, but for the dreams to stop. One night she confessed to Maester Luwin. Her voice was hoarse, empty. "I think the gods are punishing me." "For what, my lady?" he asked, though he already knew. "For hating an innocent, for letting that hate guide me." He didn't ask more. He couldn't. Back in the South, Ned moved pieces he didn't understand. When he confronted Cersei, he gave her the chance to flee. Honor again. But Jon wasn't there to protect Ned from his own mistakes. When the gold cloaks betrayed him, and Ned was thrown into the dungeons, there was no bastard son to slip him bread, no would-be brother of the Night's Watch to carry out his wishes, no Jon, to rise and rally the people in the North when his father was caged. Robb waited for word that never came. Catelyn wept for Bran and whispered apologies that would never be answered. And in the East, Daenerys felt the ground shift. Viserys was dead, her dragon eggs stirred with warmth. And when Khal Drogo promised to give her a crown not of gold, but of fire and blood, she felt something awaken, a chill that wrapped around her dreams. "I saw a boy in my vision," she told her handmaid once. "A boy who should have lived, with the blood of fire in him. But he was drowned in ice. The world was turning. But without Jon Snow, it turned colder, harder. The balance was broken. Winterfell's halls felt heavier after the news arrived. Lord Eddard Stark arrested for treason. The Raven came during a cold morning when the wind carried no birdsong, only silence. Robb Stark stood in the great hall, jaw clenched, knuckles white. He was 15, but he looked older now. The weight of 1,000 years of northern blood settled on his shoulders in one breath. Catelyn read the letter once, then again, her eyes scanning the words as if they might change. But they didn't. Ned was in the dungeons. The king was dead, and the boy on the throne was a Lannister. Catelyn didn't scream. She didn't weep. But something inside her broke for the second time in her life. The first had died in a cradle. This was worse. Robb gathered the bannermen quickly. Great John. Karstark, Glover, Umberall came with steel and fire. The North remembered, and it would answer. But something was missing. There was no John beside Robb, no quiet voice to steady him, no brother to help him bear the weight. He had Theon, but Theon was a shadow, a smiling, careless shadow, with loyalty as thin as the ice on the Godswood Pond. Robb didn't see it yet, but Catelyn did. "You don't know who you can trust," she told her son one night as they prepared to march south. "I trust my bannermen. I trust Theon." She paused. "Your father once trusted someone too. Look where it brought him." She never said the name, never told him that once, long ago, she had trusted herself, and it had led to a cold grave. They rode out under the direwolf banner, roaring. The river lords joined them, Tully's, Frey's, and every house that still remembered who Eddard Stark was. But there was no ghost padding silently beside Robb's horse. No John, calm and watchful, to smell betrayal in the air. When they crossed, the twins, Walder Frey's smirk felt heavier, his promises thinner, and still they passed. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Ned Stark was kneeling before a crowd that called for his head. He confessed to crimes he hadn't committed to save his daughters. Sansa screamed. Arya watched from the crowd, hidden in shadows. Then came the sword. The crowd gasped. Even Cersei was caught off guard, but it was too late. The blood spilled, and the North shattered. Robb's cry of fury echoed across the Trident. His sword struck faster. His war council hardened. The boy was gone, only the wolf remained. They crowned him king in the North, the first in centuries. But his eyes were hollow. There was no brother to share the title with, no John to tell him. What came next? Catelyn stood beside him as they declared him king, but her eyes drifted toward the flames. In them she saw two boys, one broken, one buried. Bran still hadn't woken, and John never had the chance. At the wall, the watch struggled. There was no John to lead the ranging beyond the wall. No sword in the darkness, no brother to rise against the dead. Lord Commander Mormont never made it back from the fist of the first men. Without John to save him, he fell in the snow, torn apart by things the realm still called myth. Sam survived, barely, but no one listened to him. He was fat, soft-spoken, forgettable. The White Walkers kept moving south, and in the east, Daenerys stood in the center of a burning pyre, dragon eggs around her. The fire swallowed her screams and gave birth to something ancient. When she rose from the ashes with dragons clinging to her skin, she whispered to the sky, "Fire answers ice." But there was no ice left to answer. The North had its king. The South had its throne. The East had its queen. But the world had lost its balance the night Jon Snow died in silence. And now it would bleed for it. The banners of the North marched like a storm vault's sigils snapping in the wind, steel shining beneath gray skies. Robb Stark was undefeated, a boy king whose victories made even the Lannisters nervous. Whispered songs began to spread through taverns. The young wolf has never lost a battle. But victory, as Catelyn knew too well, was not the same as safety. Robb won battles with sword in mind, but he had no one to warn him of the dangers that didn't wear armor like pride, or false alliances, or the cost of breaking a promise. If Jon Snow had lived, he might have reminded Robb of the weight of a vow. He might have spoken gently but firmly when Robb chose to marry for love instead of honor. But Jon was gone, buried with the truth. And so, Robb Stark broke the pact with House Frey. Catelyn tried to speak against it. "They won't forget this insult," she warned. Robb, weary and blinded by youth, replied, "Let them fume. I married for love." She wanted to scream that love was weak. That love, unchecked, had once turned her into a murderer. But she couldn't say it not, without unmaking everything. So she watched him wed the healer girl, Talisa, and felt the first crack in the foundation of their war. Meanwhile, the South boiled. King Joffrey, cruel and erratic, bled the city of what little honor it had left. Sansa Stark became a prisoner in all but name. Tyrion Lannister, trying to hold chaos together, found himself drowning in politics. And Cersei watched it all with a wine cup and a wicked grin. Then came news from River Run. Hoster Tully was dying. Catelyn rode home to her father's deathbed. She held his hand as he murmured old names, some dead, some forgotten, and closed his eyes with a sigh. Robb stayed at camp, trying to hold his fragile alliances together. And then the ravens came. Bran had awoken, but he was not the same boy. His dreams were filled with trees that whispered, wolves that spoke, and a three-eyed crow calling him chosen. Rickon had grown wild without direction. Theon Greyjoy had betrayed them all, burned Winterfell, murdered children, and claimed the castle as his own. And with Winterfell burned and the Boltons claiming loyalty to the crown, Catelyn felt the last pieces of her world slipping away. She prayed to the gods for something, anything, to make sense of it. But they stayed silent. Maybe because they remembered. Maybe because they still heard the breathless, broken gasp of a baby she had silenced. Then came the invitation. Lord Walder Frey, humiliated and insulted, welcomed them back to the twins. A wedding was planned, Edmure Tully to wed one of Frey's daughters. A new alliance, they said. A healing gesture. Catelyn's heart twisted. She didn't trust it. Frey had never been a man of forgiveness. But Robb was too tired to see it. He wanted peace. He needed it. And so, the Starks rode to the twins. The feast was loud. Laughter echoed. Wine flowed freely. And music filled the great hall. But the air was wrong. Catelyn sat beside Robb, her hand tightening around the handle of her knife. She watched Lord Walder, all sneers and smug glances. She watched the doors. Too many guards, too many glances, too few smiles. Then the music changed. The rains of Castamere. Catelyn stood. Robb turned to her. Bolts flew. Talisa fell first, a scream dying on her lips as steel pierced her womb. Robb cried out, rushing to her side. Then arrows struck him too. Catelyn grabbed a Frey's wife and held a blade to her throat. She begged for her son's life. She offered her own. But Walder Frey only laughed. "Mother of mercy," she whispered. "Please." Robb looked at her, blood pouring from his chest. He said one word, "Mother," and then he fell. Catelyn screamed, a sound so raw it cracked the air. She dragged her blade across the woman's throat and stood still as a knife slashed across hers. And just like that, the North died. There was no Jon to avenge them, no bastard son to rally what remained. The wolves had no leader. The realm had no hope. And far beyond the wall, something ancient felt the cold silence and stirred from its slumber. The twins were soaked in blood, and the North bled with it. No ravens flew from the red wedding. Only silence, only bones. The wolf banners that once howled with fury now lay in tatters on cold stone floors, soaked through with the blood of their bearers. Robb Stark, the young wolf, was gone, his headless corpse mocked on a horse, with his direwolf's head sewn where his own should be. And in Winterfell, the snow began to fall again. The Boltons, rewarded for their treachery, took the North in the name of the crown. Roose Bolton was named Warden of the North, and his bastard son Ramsay Snow was legitimized and given Winterfell as his prize. There was no Jon to stop him. No half-brother at the wall with a wolf of his own. No sworn Night's Watch commander, destined to become something greater. The North had no shield now. Only knives. Bran and Rickon were missing. Believed dead by most. Sansa was a captive in the south. Arya vanished. And Catelyn Stark, the cold mother who once tried to protect, her own by silencing another, now floated down the green fork, lifeless, with her throat slit wide. The North remembered, but it could no longer rise. At the wall, Castle Black was falling apart. The brothers of the Night's Watch were few, scattered, and leaderless. Without Jon Snow, the mutiny at Craster's Keep had gone unchecked. Jeor, Mormont never made it back. Samwell Tarly fled with Gilly and the babe, carrying knowledge that no one in power would ever hear. No dragonglass, no warnings, no leadership, just snow and silence. In the south, Joffrey celebrated his wedding with sadistic joy. He died with wine on his lips and confusion in his eyes, but his death solved little. Tommen, gentle and weak, took the throne, easily manipulated by his mother and the High Sparrow. Tyrion fled. Sansa vanished in the chaos. And Littlefinger tightened his grip on the veil, already spinning the next set of lies. Far away, Daenerys ruled Meereen now, but even as her dragons grew and the people began to call her mother, her visions returned stronger, darker. In her dreams, she walked halls of ice. Shadows danced in the fog. A direwolf howled in the distance, then choked and fell silent. She saw a baby in the snow, blue-eyed and breathless, and heard a woman screaming, not from pain, but from guilt. She woke each time with her heart pounding and one name echoing in her skull. Aegon. She didn't know why, didn't know what it meant. She was fire, but the ice had been broken long ago. And in the far north, beyond the wall, the dead marched. With no Lord Commander to unite the watch, Hardhome burned. The free folk scattered, no offer of peace, no gate to shelter behind. The Night's Watch held fast in name only, their numbers, too thin to matter. By the time they realized what was coming, it was already too late. The horn of winter blew once across the frost-bitten winds, and the wall began to crack. Ramsay Bolton hunted women for sport in Winterfell's snow-covered courtyards. He flayed men alive to remind the people who ruled now. There was no Stark to challenge him, no Jon Snow to be declared king in the north, no wildlings to come to their aid, just fear and firelight and blood. The old gods, it seemed, had abandoned them. But perhaps it wasn't punishment. Perhaps it was justice. For the boy who never had a name. For the boy who never had a mother's love. For the prince who never had a chance. Jon Snow had been the thread that might have bound fire and ice, love and duty, north and south. But that thread had been severed by a silent hand years ago. And now winter had come. The wall fell not with fire, but with silence. No armies awaited the White Walkers. No warnings were sent to the south. Castle Black, near empty and leaderless, was swallowed in a night of pale blue eyes and blades, colder than death. The few brothers left died without ceremony, some trying to fight, some begging, some simply running. No Jon Snow stood atop the ramparts. No king in the north to rally the wildlings. No Long Claw to strike the first blow. The Night King walked through the ashes and snow without resistance. South of the wall, the people of the north lived in denial. Ramsay Bolton held Winterfell with fists stained in blood. The northern lords feared him, resented him, but none dared to move. Their hope had died with Robb, and the shadows of betrayal made cowards of them all. Ramsay hunted for sport and sent skinned corpses to rebellious villages. He married Sansa, Stark after tracking her down with Littlefinger's assistance, though even Littlefinger looked uneasy around him. Sansa, once full of songs and soft dreams, now walked like glass clear, fragile, and cold. Her body bore bruises the Mesters never saw. Her soul bore worse. Had Jon Snow lived, he would have crossed fire to save her. But he didn't. And so, she endured. Far to the east, Daenerys Targaryen stood at the edge of the sea. She had finally left Meereen, her ships heavy with Unsullied and Dothraki, her dragons casting vast shadows across the waves. But her dreams had changed. Every night she saw a wall of ice cracking open and something terrible pouring through. She heard whispers of a name she couldn't remember, but it lingered, haunting her like a ghost unborn. A boy in the snow. Eyes like hers, heart like fire, but smothered in silence. She didn't know she had once had a nephew. She didn't know his name had almost been Aegon. She only knew that Westeros was colder now, emptier. Something was missing, and the world was paying for it. Arya, across the sea, wore many faces, but could never shed her own pain. She trained with death, learned to become no one, but deep in her core, she still heard the voices of her family. She would whisper their names every night before sleep, the last one always coming with hesitation. Mother, father, Robb, Bran, Rick and Sansa. And then, Jon, though she didn't know why his name tasted like grief. Bran, far beyond the wall, no longer dreamed, he lived in visions. He was no longer Bran, not really. The three-eyed. Raven's memories flooded him until he was a boy in name only. But even in his endless knowing, there were blind spots, places in the past that pulsed with pain and went quiet when he tried to touch them. A cradle, a weeping father, a mother, walking away with red eyes. The god's wood in Winterfell grew quiet. The heart tree's face wept sap in the dark of night. The gods knew what had been lost. A song was never sung. A war was never won. A balance had never been struck. And so winter came. Villages fell like wheat under scythes of ice. The Night King left nothing behind. No screams, no fires, no mercy. Only white silence. When Daenerys landed on Dragonstone, she was already too late. Jon Snow had been the bridge, the blood of ice and fire, the rightful heir, the quiet voice that could have united North and South. But instead, the realm had been ruled by liars, fools, and flayers. Cersei still sat the Iron Throne crowned. In gold and grief, her enemies too scattered to rise. But death was coming for her too. Not from a sword, but from cold hands beneath the Red Keep itself. The White Walkers were moving now, and no one was ready. Snow fell upon King's Landing, not the soft, fleeting dusting of winter's flirtation, but the heavy, suffocating kind that blanketed corpses and silenced cities. The dead had come. They breached the north with ease. Number. Jon Snow had stood at the wall to unite the wildlings and the Watch. No Night King had been slain mid-March. No alliances forged between ice and fire. Without Jon, the cracks between kingdoms became canyons, and the dead poured through every one of them. Winterfell burned under Ramsay Bolton's reign. He died screaming, not by sword or flame, but at the hands of his own hounds, who no longer recognized him as master. His skin was nailed to his own gates. Sansa survived him, but barely. She fled into the snows with a broken heart and a hatred colder than the wind. But she had nowhere left to run. Bran saw it all. In the weirwood's memory, he witnessed the realm collapse. His body was half dead, his soul pulled too far from himself to return. He watched the White Walkers march through the Riverlands. saw Arya in Braavos turn away from her training and sail west, not to save her home, but to escape its death. Daenerys finally reached the mainland. Her dragons roared over a dying continent, burning pockets of the undead wherever they could be found. She landed in the Reach, then the Stormlands, and finally marched toward King's Landing with all. A fire she could muster, but it wasn't enough. Drogon died in the Vale, pierced by a spear of ice forged from ancient, cursed magic. Rhaegal vanished into a storm and never returned. Only Viserion remained at her side, and with every battle he fought, his eyes grew more distant, more strange, as if the chill in the air was working its way into his blood. Cersei watched it all with a golden cup in hand, her pregnancy long. Lost, her sanity crumbling with each footstep the dead took closer to her walls. She refused to yield. She had trusted in walls, wildfire, and Jaime, but Jaime was gone, killed by men loyal to no house, scavengers fleeing the dead who thought gold still held value. She died alone, not with dignity, not with revenge, but crushed, under rubble when the Red Keep gave way to time and death. Her last words were not for her children or her crown, but a trembling, confused whisper. He was supposed to save us, but he hadn't lived long enough to try. Jon Snow the boy, buried with no name, no future, was the thread that could have held this kingdom together. Not by sword, not even by birthright, but by the quiet, unshakable strength that had always been in his soul. Without him, fire never met ice. North never met south. Honor never had a second chance. Bran died with the tree he sat beneath, his mind lost in time as the roots froze solid. Sansa, wandering the snowy woods beyond the ruins of the Eyrie, sat against a cold rock and didn't rise again. Arya disappeared west of Westeros, never to return. Maybe she found peace. Maybe she found more death. No one would ever know. Daenerys made her last stand at Dragonstone. The dead came by sea, walking across frozen tides. Viserion fought until his fire turned blue, then collapsed beside her, his wings folding over her body like a final embrace. And then silence. The Iron Throne stood, twisted and cold, surrounded by snow and ash. No king claimed it. No hand held a sword before it. Only wind howled through the great hall, where once kings and queens had screamed their will. The world had been promised a prince who was promised. But he died in his cradle, suffocated by the sins of a mother who couldn't find love for a child not hers. And so the realm bled and froze and forgot.